Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, So Grow Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. So trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of So Grow Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Are you a nonprofit professional who's feeling overwhelmed and burnt out? Well, welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast. I am your host, Haley Cooper. On this podcast, we will share stories of leadership, courage, and empathy that'll help you learn to take care of yourself, your staff, organization, and community. You will hear from nonprofit leaders who have been in your shoes and have learned best practices to raise more revenue and make a greater impact. Let's thrive together. Hello, everyone. This is Haley Cooper, the host of the Lead with Heart podcast. And today we have Dr. Lola Gershfeld. I have known her for the last couple of years, and she has been such a valuable part of my journey to getting to where I am today and the process of developing this leadership podcast, as well as my business, The Savvy Fundraiser. A little bit about Dr. Lola. She's the founder of EMC Leaders, is an organizational psychologist and a developer of the emotional connection process, or EMC, which we will talk about a lot. A groundbreaking and an empirically supported approach based on attachment and the science of emotional connection to build resilience, resolve conflict, and nurture thriving cultures. Dr. Gershfeld has worked with over 700 cases, helping organizations, teams, and individuals to thrive. And we actually just came off of a coaching session. And so I am so grateful that now we get to hop on and record in a formal setting. So welcome, Dr. Lola. And why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got started with the EMC process?
Thank you, Haley. It's such a pleasure to speak with you today. You know, emotional connection is a fun topic for me to cover because I never get tired of talking about emotional connection. I mean, who would not want to know how to integrate the brain and emotions and attachment and connection to create strong relationships? Who would not want to know this? Like, we all want to feel safe and connected with each other because we feel that it blends all the things that we personally deeply care about and these elements of what the human condition is asking for, which is to be vulnerable, to feel in order to connect. As long as we can connect with people we depend on, we can actually thrive. So it's so nice to be here. And you're an inspiration to me, Haley, because I love your desire and being able to share this message with people. And I actually started this many years ago. I don't know if you remember, I actually served on a private company board where I was fascinated with people solving technical problems but could not talk to each other. I was fascinated how one would, how one person would get angry or shut down, and I would take one side or the other, and then people would get still unhappy with each other. So emotional connection is my journey where I was just fascinated to know and eager to solve the problem on how people can work better together. How can they communicate together? And I came to this emotional connection process through my research of understanding that emotion is the most powerful thing in the room. It's also the most powerful agent of change. If you want to help people work better together and lead better board dynamics and board cultures, you got to address people's emotions. And then you got to learn how to work with emotions. So it was a journey for me. And I remember thinking to myself, emotion has nothing to do with it. If people could just understand how to communicate better, they can solve anything. But actually, the funny thing is what I learned is when people are stressed and when people are triggered and when they're out of emotional balance, their communication skills go out the window because they can't access those skills. And that's what happened to my board. So I'm really happy to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for introducing the concept of the emotional process. Like you said, connection is so important. It's something that we all want. We all want to feel connected to each other. We all want to feel valued and heard. And like you said, when emotions are high, and we'll get into the science of emotional attachment and the theory, but our amygdala takes over our prefrontal cortex and we cannot think logically. We cannot communicate. We cannot collaborate. And so your process is crucial to being able to tap into that so that we can thrive, so that we can connect with each other and move forward. So can you talk a little bit more about the science of attachment and why it's so important to build connection?
Sure. Well, we know from the science of attachment that when we work together, we depend on each other. And this dependency creates an attachment in our brain. And our brains automatically turn on our bonding needs. The emotional connection is what holds the bond together. So in a way, what attachment says is that the way our brain works is that we are wired for connection. This is part of our survival mode. And when we lose our connection, what all the research is saying is that part of our brain goes into panic. And it's not because we are immature or we are not skilled enough. It's because our brain basically said that we are not designed to deal with stress or to deal with things like business or life alone. We're not designed to do that way. We have to have people around us so our brain can function to the highest degree. So what basically for us to learn how to understand attachment, how to understand emotion, connection, we have to understand emotion, which makes sense, right? Emotion really moves us into action. Emotion tells us what matters in our environment. And so we have to learn how to slow things down, slow the emotion down. And when we get stuck, emotions start to activate, tells us that something is happening. We lost that connection. And slowly we start to recognize how powerful emotion is. And what we learn from attachment science is that by recognizing, by naming emotion, we start to feel, we start to organize what's happening in our brain. So our prefrontal cortex can re-engage and can function better. So naming emotion, recognizing emotions, and organizing emotions actually creates more order in our brain. So it's not that chaotic anymore. And that helps us. And that really emerged in the last 20 years in the psychology. It really comes up to in our work how important emotion is and how powerful emotion is to create a secure bond. So the power of knowing that someone has your back, that your bosses are there for you or your teammates are there for you, and you can turn to them when you need them, is what really helps us to face danger when we are overwhelmed. And so it's really rooted in our bones. The longing for connection is like oxygen for us. Feeling that you matter to people around you and they will come when you call is our main survival strategy.
Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs. Helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. Yes, what you are saying is so important, that emotional connection is the bond that holds us together. And you also mentioned it allows us to feel safe, emotionally safe, so that we can move forward. So I know that when I reached out to you, I was a party of one as a fundraiser in an organization, and there was disconnection across the board. And I know that, one, nonprofits, it is emotionally high. We're dealing with really hard issues, and our emotions are running high, not only within ourselves, but just within our missions and the difficulties that we're faced with every day. And it can feel really lonely because generally, like I was the only one in my department, and I didn't really have that space to connect, or to have that space where I felt like someone had my back because I was by myself. So how can you use this strategy in nonprofits where leadership is generally really lonely and different positions to implement it within your organization or within yourself?
Well, Haley, I think you're touching on some key points here, right? I felt so lonely. And when I felt so alone, I didn't know who to reach to because none of the people that I looked around felt safe to me, right? So I think one of the things that we recognize is that when we lose a connection with people, we go into what we call protective behaviors, or protective ways to start to get that connection back. So there's two roles that we take in any disconnection. We either withdraw, right, to protect our relationship, to protect our connection. We don't want to say anything that will continue to disconnect us, or we pursue the connection. And by pursuing, what I mean is we start to use ineffective strategies to get that connection back. We become so desperate for connection. And it's not that we do this on purpose. It's that we have not learned any other way to reconnect. So some of the ineffective strategies that we find is we start to blame, we start to judge, criticize, demand, lecture. All of these ways show that we are desperate for connection. And what we know that pursuers who pursue the connection, they use those strategies. I'm a pursuer. I used to blame, judge, criticize, lecture, and demand. For example, let's make that decision right now. Why can't you respond to me? I have been emailing you over and over and over again. Why don't you talk to me, right? So I'm pursuing the connection. I'm blaming, I'm criticizing, I'm judging. Or I withdraw and disengage. I avoid. I stonewall, right? I don't respond to you. All of these two things, either we withdraw or pursue the connection, we create an unsafe environment for people. Some of the things that we don't recognize is when we demand, our voice goes high, right? Our tone of voice goes stern. We come across very scary to the other person. So that creates an unsafe environment. When we withdraw and disengage, or when we avoid, we don't recognize that what we are doing is we're shutting people out. And that creates even more anxiety than ever before. So either we withdraw or we pursue, we create what we call a negative cycle. And through that negative cycle, we start to feel isolated and alone. So the more we pursue, the more the other person withdraws. The more the other person withdraws, we pursue. So, and we get stuck in this perpetual negative cycle where we feel desperate and alone, or we feel isolated and alone by withdrawing. So it makes sense that when you felt disconnected, you probably withdraw. Are you a withdrawer, Haley?
In that instance, I was a pursuer. So
You were a pursuer.
Judged, I demanded, I lectured. Generally, I am a withdrawer, but in that specific situation, I was the pursuer and the other person was the withdrawer.
Right. So you pursue, and then you burn out. Yeah, you burn out to run after this person. And what you do, you start to feel alone and disconnected, and you pursue again, alone and disconnected. So you felt alone and isolated, and the person who withdrew also felt alone and disconnected because they didn't know how to respond. So what do we teach? What do we do in the emotional connection process? By using the emotional connection process, what we do is we slow things down. Number one, we create safety. That's step one in the process, to create safety. How do we create safety? We allow people to share what is happening with them during the disconnection. We give people the language of emotions so they can name emotions, right? Like I talked about how important it is to name emotions. Lisa Feldman Bennett talked about naming emotion as granular as possible. Be specific. The more specificity you have, the less your brain becomes overwhelmed. People who withdraw, they get overwhelmed. They don't know how to share their emotions. People who pursue, they don't know how to share their emotions too, because they're desperately seeking connection. So in our emotional connection process, one of the important things is we give the language of emotions. We also give the language of the raw spots. People don't know how to recognize that they have sensitivity, right? They have sensitive spots. So by articulating the raw spots, articulating the emotions, you create order in your brain, and the brain becomes less overwhelmed. And the less overwhelmed the brain becomes, the more open the brain is to ideas, to solutions, to opinions. So it doesn't become anxious or distressed by hearing the other person. So you start to feel more empathic to each other. You start to feel more caring toward each other. You start to feel more supportive of each other. The second step, so the first thing is to provide safety so people feel like they can articulate what's happening to them. The second part is validating people that experience. Every person is validated. One of the things that is important is that when people get into disconnection and they start to be in a negative cycle, they start to feel and they start to think that conflict is what really causing the negative cycle. But what we know is it's not the conflict that causes the negative cycle. It's the emotional disconnection that causes the negative cycle, and it perpetuates the cycle. So the conflict is just the inflammation. The virus is emotional disconnection. When you're able to validate people's experiences, when you're able to recognize and acknowledge people's emotional experience, what's happening with them, they start to feel heard, they start to feel understood, they start to feel validated, and they start to feel like they are seen, right? So they become less desperate and they become more engaged. So for withdrawers, they feel safer to reconnect and start to re-engage in the conversation. And for pursuers, they start to feel less desperate, so they become safer in the conversation. So does that make sense? So in the whole process, what we're trying to do is we're trying to soften the pursuer and we start to re-engage the withdrawer. So all parties feel safe.
Yes, I think what you're saying is so important. You said so many important things. And I think one of them is talking about that negative cycle, because I think when we get in it, like you said, we name and we blame, and name the negative cycle, I think is so helpful. So talk a little bit more about how we can move from that negative cycle to a positive connection. What steps can people take? Obviously, they should hire you. to go through this emotional connection process. But
or they can hire you because you're
there
the
you
certified EMC trainer.
Yeah. So what are some steps that people can start to take to, number one, become more aware of their emotions? I know there's the 4 components of emotional intelligence, as well as reach for that positive connection with another person, and then continue, to understand when the negative cycle comes up so that they can understand those emotions and continue to move towards that positive connection.
Very good. So one of the things that we know is that to be able to name that negative cycle takes a little time. That's kind of like our whole process goes through 3 stages. Number 1 is de-escalation stage, where we go through 4 steps of creating the safety, recognizing the emotions, recognizing the raw spots, and naming the negative cycle as the bad guy, right? Nobody wants to be blamed for what's happening. So once people are able to say, oh, we're in a negative cycle. How do we get into a negative cycle? When people blame, judge, criticize, lecture, avoid, withdraw, disengage, all of these behaviors are entrance into the negative cycle. So when you can call out the negative cycle, boom, you're already slowing it down. So the second stage is restructuring the cycle. So restructuring the cycle is when we start to recognize what is happening with us, right? Creating distance, working distance with emotions, so we can become more vulnerable with each other, and we can recognize what is it that I need to feel safe and connected with you, right? What is it what happened to me? So I can come to you and say, Haley, when you said this in a meeting, that was very hurtful to me. I care about you. I love working with you. But you probably did not recognize is the way you said it. It made me feel like my opinion was not valued. And so in that moment, what we are doing is we're helping people to become accessible, responsive, and engaged. All emotional variables. What does it mean to be emotionally accessible? What I just said, emotionally accessible means I'm coming to you with my vulnerability. I'm coming to you, opening my heart, recognizing what's happening with you. I'm not blaming you. I'm not judging you, but I'm saying, Haley, that was so painful to me. I want you to know that you probably didn't mean it, but I just want you to know that when you said that, I felt like my opinion did not matter. Emotionally responsive means you recognize, you don't defend and you don't dismiss my feelings, what I just said, but you make room for it and you say, Lola, I get it. Wow, thank you for sharing that. I get it that when I said this, it made you feel like your opinion didn't matter. I want you to know you do matter to me. Your opinion does matter to me. And I said it because I felt so stressed. I felt so scared about this topic that we talked about that it came across as if your opinion didn't matter. But you know what? I want to reassure you that your opinion does matter. And I responded because I got scared. And I got scared because I felt like we were not moving into the same direction. So here I'm being emotionally responsive to your feelings. I want to validate your feelings. I want to acknowledge it and I want to make room for it. I'm reassuring you that your opinion does matter to me. And I'm also being accessible, emotionally accessible, where I can share my vulnerability. Emotionally engaged is when I'm able to stay in a conversation, even though I am not agreeing with you, even though my emotions start to kind of get scared, I'm still able to be emotionally engaged. So, for example, when I come to you and say, Haley, when you said that really hurt me. I felt like my opinion did not matter. Your job is to be emotionally engaged, meaning you keep your emotions a little bit on the side right now. Maybe you start to feel defensive or you start to feel like I'm attacked. Maybe like, how could you think this way? I didn't. So your job of being emotionally engaged is to be able to maintain your emotional balance so you can respond to me emotionally. So one of the things that we know to create a secure bond in relationships, our brain, our amygdala, the emotional part of the brain, constantly assesses 3 questions. And those 3 questions is, are you there for me? Do I matter to you? Will you be there when I need you? And all of those questions come up in moments of vulnerability. So when I'm feeling hurt, and I can come to you and I can reach out to you and I can say, Haley, when you said that, it really hurt me. I felt like my opinion didn't matter. And you are able to respond to me emotionally. We create a bonding moment. We create a secure attachment. That gives my brain an experience that tells me Haley is safe. Haley has my back. Haley, I matter to Haley. I'm important to Haley. I can come to her again in the next time when I have a vulnerable moment. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. And I like that you gave like a clear example of how someone could use that in a conversation, because I think it is so important to, as a leader, to create that emotional safety within yourself, but also within your team, where your team can come and verbally vocalize if something is wrong or something came up for them. So being able to not get all heated and like say, I'm correct as a leader, but really taking that emotional assessment of yourself and then creating that emotional responsiveness for those on your team so that they can continue to voice their needs and opinions, because they do matter. And your emotions matter, their emotions matter, everyone matters. We need to create that space where everyone feels that way. So can you talk a little bit, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, about the slow motion camera and working through emotions exercise, which I know that we've talked about as I'm going to do board trainings and trainings with teams. So can you talk a little bit about how that works within a team dynamic and why it's important to slow things down?
Well, yes. The slow motion camera is one of the tools that we teach people to use. And the reason why we teach that is because emotion is fast. And it's supposed to be fast because it's supposed to save our lives. However, in our interactions with each other, if we go fast and we miss the moment of emotions, the emotions takes over us. The fear grows, we become more anxious, and then we start to use ineffective strategies to respond to those emotional stressors. The slow motion camera, the way it works, it's like, think of a sports team, a sport game that you watch on TV. If there's a special moment that happens in that game, what do the TV stations do? They rewind the tape. They rewind that moment. And how many times do they rewind? They rewind several times. They rewind like 4 or 5 times. And slow motion. So when we become emotionally aroused, or when there's an emotional moment that happens in our team dynamics or in team conversation, what we do is we want to slow things down. By slowing things down, number one, we can say, Haley, I see something is happening because I'm paying attention, right? I'm paying attention to your facial expression. I'm paying attention to your tone of voice. I'm paying attention to the speed of your speech. So if your speed is increasing, if your tone is getting higher, if your facial expression is changing, that is the moment to slow things down. That tells me something is happening. Or when I see you disengage and you stop talking, that is the moment to use the slow motion camera and go back and say, I want to just slow it down if it's okay, because you guys are saying something so important. And then I'm using reflection. What I'm hearing you say is that when this happens to you, you become really worried. Am I getting it? Right? I'm slowing things down. I'm also slowing things down by repetition, right? Because in a game, we repeat things over and over. They repeat that scene over and over again. And the reason why I'm repeating things is because I really want to get to the emotional experience, what is happening behind the content that is discussed in the meeting, right? So I'm going to slow it down. Let me see if I understand you correctly. What I'm hearing you say is that when we were discussing this topic, suddenly something occurred for you, something happening for you. Can you tell me more about that? What is happening for you in that moment? Are you worried that we might be late for this project? Or are you worried that we miss something? Are you worried that we might be at risk when we do this? What is that worry, right? What is that fear? Because there's a fear happening. As we know, in our emotional world, there are three levels of emotions. There are surface emotions, there are softer emotions, and then there are primary emotions. The primary emotion is what really drives us to do something. And there are four primary emotions. There's fear, sadness, shame, and surprise. So if you're able to use your slow motion camera to get to those four primary emotions, you are going to get to the core of the problem. I remember doing a training at one point, and I was working with this particular team. And after the team session, the leader comes to me and says, I don't understand. How is it that possible you got to the core problem so quick by just repeating yourself? So I just repeated over and over again. What I'm hearing you say is that when this happened, this is what you felt. Am I getting it? Okay. And the person now tells me the story again. So I say, okay, let me see if I understand. So what I'm hearing you say is that when you did this and this person said, and this is how they react, this would happen to you, right? So by repeating and by slowing things down, by recognizing the emotional component that drove their interaction, I got to the core issue, what was really happening to them. And then people were able to move forward very quickly.
Hey there, podcast family. If you're like me and deeply committed to improving your leadership skills and fostering better connections with your team, I've got something truly amazing to share with you. I'm proud to introduce the EMC Masterclass, something I talk about often as a certified trainer. It's an incredible program developed by the renowned Dr. Lola Gershfeld, an organizational psychologist and corporate emotional connection expert. You might remember her from a podcast episode where she shared invaluable insights into the world of emotional connection. Dr. Gershfeld's EMC Leaders courses are designed for anyone working with people, whether you're a manager, supervisor, team leader, educator, coach, mentor, or a team member. This program is truly for everyone looking to enhance their communication and collaboration skills to raise more revenue for their mission. Now, let me tell you why the EMC Masterclass is a game changer. Dr. Gershfeld's groundbreaking emotional connection process has been integrated into top universities' curriculum and recognized by international organizations like ICF, HRCI, and SHRM. Humans are wired to seek emotional safety, and when we feel safe, we're more likely to take risks, share innovative ideas, and collaborate effectively. The EMC process is the catalyst for creating that emotional safety within your team. The virtual EMC Masterclass consists of 8 modules with 4 hours of expertly recorded material, 13 quizzes to reinforce your learning, and a workbook filled with activities for offline practice and something I still refer to daily. Ready to become an emotional connection master? Dr. Gershfeld is offering an exclusive detail for our podcast listeners. Use the code LEADWITHHEART to enjoy a generous 10% discount on the EMC Masterclass. Head over to emcleaders.com and enroll in the EMC Masterclass today. Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And I know that has worked in my own life and across all of my relationships. And I think this EMC process, we often talk a lot about, workplace environment and relationships, but it really works across all relationships as you continue to learn this process and naming your emotions. I did want to transition a little bit. I know that we were talking about this today even. A lot of boards come to me because they want to do fundraising, but when we get and they lack board engagement. and they don't know what the issue is. And obviously for organizations to thrive, we need engagement across the organization. And this process has been super helpful to be able to understand the underlying issue and build that emotional connection so that the board can move forward and raise more revenue. So can we talk a little bit about, I know that you just released your 10 tips on board engagement. So can we talk a little bit about board dynamics and how we can, start to build better board engagement and emotional connection across boards?
Yes, board dynamics is one of my favorite topics as well, because I remember, like from my own experience, that boards often get disconnected in moments because they don't know how to work with emotions. So board dynamics is really built on relationships. The stronger the relationships, the better the dynamics. And I remember working with this particular board, and they had about 20 board members. So it was a large board. And I would meet with the chairman, the vice chair, and the CEO. And the first meeting, I came to them and I said, well, to improve the engagement on your board, and they wanted board engagement improvement and they wanted performance to be better. So they had about 30% attendance rate on board meetings, and they wanted to have 100%. And they also felt like not all the board members were doing things that they were supposed to be doing. So I said, well, in order for us to make any improvements, we have to talk about emotions. And I remember the vice chair would say, Lola, I'm sorry, I've been on the board for 40 years and I've been doing board strategy and board governance. Emotions don't belong in the boardroom. Emotions are something that we don't talk about. We are here to strategize. And I said, yeah, I know, I get it. It's a new topic for you. And I absolutely hear you. I validate your experience. It's very new to you. So it's okay, but let's continue on. And I would ask them, what's happening for them emotionally before they go to board meetings, at the board meetings, and after the board meetings. And slowly they started to recognize the experience that they were experiencing, how nervous they were, how scared they were going into the board meeting. I mean, think about it. Emotions are contagious. If they're scared and nervous, what would make the board members be? So by having the fear and all of that nervousness, they would not really plan good board meetings. By recognizing the emotions, started to talk about emotions and just being vulnerable with each other, they started to be more open to the experience and be more creative on what to do at board meetings. So people start to feel more engaged. And they started to create rituals. Like, for example, they started to greet people personally at each board meeting. They started to recognize board members. They started to share their own experience at board meetings. They started to make sure that at every board meeting, every single board member is engaged in some way or form of another. And slowly, the board became much more excited. The board they would bring like music into the board meeting. They started to create board packets with personalized messages. All of the creativity started to come alive by them sharing their emotions with each other. And one time I remember, I would meet with them once a month, and I would ask them all the time what's happening with them emotionally, and we would process and be there for each other. And then we would strategize what some of the things that they can do to nurture their relationships. And I remember at one meeting, I would go around the room and ask, how you feel. And the vice chair would say, Lola, this was like 8 months later. Lola, I really don't like to talk about my emotions because I'm a very private person and I still just don't get it. What's the point of this? And I'd say, I get it. Absolutely. No problem. You don't have to participate, but you can just watch. And he would watch. And after about, I would say 10 more months, He comes after a board meeting and he says, I want to share how I felt at the board meeting today. I felt ignored. I felt like I was not important. I felt so hurt that I just want to run. And by that time, the CEO and the board chair knew how to be emotionally responsive. They didn't dismiss his feelings. They didn't defend. They said, thank you for sharing. What can we do? What do you need? And he said, just be there. Just be there for me. When I share my experience, just be there for me. And just by that moment, you could just feel the energy in the room shift. And imagine, Haley, for this person who has been on the board for 40 years, sharing his emotions for the first time, how he felt, and his board member, his board chair, and the CEO was just there for him. I got a phone call the next day from him, and he said, Lola, I never experienced this before, but what you're doing with emotional connection on our board has shifted our dynamics hundreds folds. I have more fun at these board meetings than any other board meetings in my 40 years. I have seen this dynamic shift from disengagement to full, complete engagement. And what you have done with emotional connection with this board is like turning a switch light on. Before it was dark in the room, and what you did, you just turned on the light for us. He couldn't stop telling me how appreciative he is, how impressed he is. And suddenly everything started to put into place. So emotional connection is like a gift that keeps on giving. When people are emotionally connected, they start to support each other, validate each other, recognize each other, create together, coordinate, and share information like never before. I remember board members would just get up in the middle of the board meeting and say, I feel so special here. I feel so valued here. I just want to tell you how incredible this board meeting is. And imagine people constantly saying these things, how nurturing that is. We forget that we need to know that. We need to have this. We need to feel this. We need to hear this. It's like being in marriage, right? You don't just say one time, I love you, and that's the end of it. We want to hear it over and over again. We get up in the morning, we're hungry, we need to eat. Well, the same thing for our emotional state. We need to hear how important we are to each other, how much we care about each other, and how we are valued. So emotional connection is the gift that keeps on giving.
It really does, because when I was first introduced, here we are like 4 years later, and you've been such a gift in my life, and just providing all your wisdom and knowledge and connection, because I always feel so much better after having a session with you, because you really drive that forward of making me feel important, making me feel like I'm valued. And so I appreciate you for that. Is there anything else that you want people to know about this process and why it's so important in this day and age?
I think what people need to know is it takes practice, right? We have been, like, I look at the interaction as a dance, and emotion is the music of the dance. In order for us to dance together to the same music, we have to change the music. But if our board is disengaged or have not been very effective, we can do two things. We can continue to be in that negative cycle, right? Or we can say to ourselves, you know what? I want to change things. I long for the connection. I want to be connected with my board members. I want to feel safe and inspired and motivated. Well, how are we going to do that? We're going to learn how to change the music, how to dance together to the same music. And the music is we care about each other, we value each other, we matter to each other. And when we are able to keep that music and learn how to be emotionally accessible, responsive, and engaged, we start to change the music. And that is amazing because when we are connected, we continue to flourish, we continue to develop, and we create a thriving culture as a result of it.
Yes, I love it. Well, speaking of connection and how important it is, how can people get connected to you?
Well, I think they can connect to me by going on our website, emcleaders.com. They can get a book that I wrote with my colleague, Ramin Sadehi. The book is called Emotional Connection, the EMC Strategy. And that's the best way to start learning about the emotional connection. They can also attend our public workshops that we have, our training programs, and they can always email me, lola@emcleaders.com. Follow us on LinkedIn at EMC Leaders. We love sharing this information because we can see how big of a difference this makes. It enriches people's lives. It creates deeper and stronger relationships, and it makes you alive.
Yes, definitely. And I'll be linking to all of that in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I just want to let you know that you are not alone. We are providing this space for you to feel connected, to feel like you matter, and to feel like you are part of a community so that you can thrive. Thank you so much for tuning in, and go follow us on LinkedIn. If you have valued these stories or learned something from what you've heard, please share this podcast episode or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support, and together we can build a better community and world.